There is a place in the center of Africa where sunlight barely reaches the ground. Not at night. At noon, the Congo rainforest covers roughly 3.9 million square kilometers, more than 1.5 million square miles, and across much of its interior, the canopy is so dense that almost none of the available sunlight reaches the forest floor. Below it, life has been evolving in conditions of near permanent shade for millions of years. Most of this forest has never been walked by a scientist. There are no roads reaching deep into much of its interior. Rivers provide the main routes through the forest, and many eventually disappear into swamps that are almost impossible to cross on foot. This is not a forest science has finished with. It is a forest science is still discovering. There is a bird here that can stand nearly as tall as a person and has no living relative anywhere else on Earth. It belongs to a family of its own and moves through the forest with a strange stillness, watching from the shadows and even taking young crocodiles when the opportunity comes. Farther down in the rivers and swamps, there is a fish that can breathe air and survive the disappearance of its own river. When the water recedes, it buries itself in mud and forms a protective cocoon, remaining sealed underground for years until the water returns. Another fish does something even stranger. It produces its own electric field and uses disturbances in that field to sense the world around it. It does not depend entirely on vision because it has developed another way of finding its way through the darkness. And then there is the animal that took modern science 18 years to identify. In 2008, a researcher photographed something moving through the canopy. The image was too unclear to identify. It was passed between specialists, compared against known species, and eventually filed away. Then, in 2019, another photograph provided a clearer look. It still took until 2026 to confirm what the animal actually was. A new species of primate, separated from its closest known relative by millions of years of evolution. It had been living inside this forest the entire time, and it was not an isolated discovery. Between 2013 and 2023, researchers formally described 742 new species from the Congo rainforest alone. New snakes, new spiders, new mammals, new things with no name until someone finally found them. The forest is still giving things up. The catalog is not finished, and the darkness is not empty. Tonight, we're going into the Congo rainforest to follow the animals already known to science, the discoveries that are still emerging from the forest, and the question of how much life could remain hidden in a place this difficult to reach. Before we do, if this kind of content is what keeps you curious, consider subscribing and staying with us for more stories like this. Now, let's leave the roads behind and head into the deeper forest. For much of the Congo rainforest, distance is measured less by miles than by obstacles. A river may carry a traveler deep into the basin, then narrow into channels surrounded by swamp. Beyond the banks, firm ground can disappear beneath saturated soil, tangled roots, and waterlogged vegetation. Roads are scarce across the interior, and in many places there is no practical route for vehicles at all. The forest has kept large portions of itself physically difficult to enter. That separation matters to biology. The Congo Basin contains roughly 1.5 million square miles of rainforest, making it larger than Alaska and second in area among tropical forests. Its scale creates room for populations to become isolated from one another, while rivers, swamps, ridges, and dense vegetation divide habitats into smaller ecological worlds. An animal adapted to one part of the forest may encounter an entirely different set of conditions only a short distance away. Above the ground, those conditions change with height. Emergent trees rise toward the upper light, some reaching around 60 meters, which is about 197 feet. Below them stretches a broad canopy where leaves intercept most incoming sunlight. Farther down, the understory receives only a fraction of what reaches the crowns, and the forest floor can receive roughly 1 to 2% of the sunlight falling on the canopy. That creates several environments stacked vertically inside the same forest. Heat, moisture, wind, food, predators, and available light change from one level to another. A bird moving through the upper branches occupies a different biological neighborhood from a fish beneath swamp water, while an animal moving through leaf litter may experience conditions closer to a separate ecosystem than to the canopy overhead. The Congo's history adds another dimension. Parts of the Central African rainforest landscape have remained forested through immense spans of geological time, with refuges persisting through climatic changes and allowing lineages to survive and diversify. Forest has existed here across more than 70 million years of changing Earth history, reaching back before the extinction of the non avian dinosaurs. Species have had long periods to specialize in foods, nesting sites, water conditions, layers of vegetation, and seasonal rhythms. Isolation does not guarantee that every creature becomes strange. It does create opportunities for unusual solutions to survive when they fit a particular place. In the Congo, those opportunities occur across an enormous landscape that remains difficult to survey. A species can persist in a swamp channel, remote canopy, or forest pocket for generations without entering a scientific collection. Biological discovery here is tied closely to access. Researchers cannot catalog what they cannot reach, and reaching the interior often means traveling by river, crossing wetlands, or moving on foot through vegetation that slows every step. Even large animals can remain difficult to observe when their habitat contains countless layers of cover and stretches across an area measured in millions of square miles. The forest acts as both habitat and filter. Light is filtered by leaves, movement is filtered by terrain, access is filtered by rivers and wetlands. Over long periods, those barriers have given evolution countless opportunities to produce specialized forms, each suited to a particular corner of the living structure. The shoebill belongs to one of those corners, and its peculiar body begins to make more sense when the forest itself is understood as the force that shaped the conditions around it. At first glance, the shoebill seems assembled from familiar parts, then arranged according to an unfamiliar plan. Its body can reach about 1.5 meters, which is about 5 feet, with long legs, broad wings, and slate gray feathers that blend into the muted colors of swamp vegetation. The feature that changes the entire impression is the bill. It can reach about 23 centimeters, which is about 9 inches in length, and around 10 centimeters, which is about 4 inches across. Its broad, clog-like shape narrows toward a hooked tip. That bill gives the bird a presence unlike the herons and storks that share its habitat. Classification once reflected that uncertainty. Naturalists debated whether the shoebill belonged among storks, pelicans, or herons before anatomical and genetic evidence placed it in its own family, Belunicipidae. It is the only living member of that family, leaving no close living counterpart beside it. Its scientific name, Beluniceps rex, translates roughly as whale-headed king, a reference to the enormous bill that dominates its profile. The weapon is most useful where the water itself creates a problem for fish. In swamp channels with low oxygen, lungfish and other aquatic animals may need to rise toward the surface. The shoebill positions itself along the margin and waits for the right movement. Then its head and bill drive forward together. The strike is powerful enough to crush or sever large prey, and the hooked tip helps secure struggling animals before they can slip back into the water. Its menu reaches far beyond ordinary fish. Lungfish, tilapia, catfish, water snakes, and monitor lizards all appear among its prey. Young Nile crocodiles can also become targets. A crocodile hatchling may be small enough for a shoebill to seize, despite the reptile's armor and jaws. The bird's hunting style depends on timing more than pursuit, conserving energy until a single movement brings the prey within reach. People around the region knew the bird long before European zoologists assigned it a place in their catalogs. Egyptian imagery appears to depict a bird resembling the shoebill, while later Persian and Ottoman names included Abu Markub, meaning father of a slipper. European accounts from the 19th century described a peculiar swamp bird that could remain in one position for extraordinary periods. Formal scientific description came in 1851. Communication adds another unusual detail. Instead of relying on a rich song, the shoebill uses its enormous bill as an instrument. Rapidly snapping the mandibles together creates a hard, rattling burst that can carry across the marsh. Bill clattering serves during greetings, nest interactions, and moments of agitation, giving the bird a mechanical voice suited to a creature whose appearance already seems almost architectural. Only about 3,300 to 5,300 mature shoebills remain in the wild. Their rarity makes each surviving population important, especially because they depend on extensive wetlands with suitable water levels and abundant prey. During breeding, the same wetlands become nurseries, where adults invest months in raising a single young bird, tying survival closely to the persistence of the marsh itself. The bird can spend long periods fixed beside the water, then move with astonishing precision when the moment arrives, its strange form revealing how completely one predator can be shaped around one particular kind of place. A shoebill nest can begin with what looks like abundance. Two pale eggs rest together, warmed beneath the same parent, each carrying the possibility of becoming a healthy young bird. Both are incubated. Both can hatch. For a short period, two chicks share the same nest, the same parents, and the same supply of food brought from the surrounding wetlands. That arrangement rarely lasts. When the adults leave to hunt, the older chick may turn toward its smaller sibling. Pecking begins with movements that can seem almost incidental, then becomes more deliberate. The larger chick pushes, strikes, and drives the younger one away from the safest part of the nest. If the attack continues, the smaller chick can die. When the adults return, they generally do not intervene. This behavior is known as siblicide, and among shoebills, it forms part of the species' ordinary reproductive pattern. The second egg functions as a reserve. A nestling that hatches first has a substantial advantage in size and strength, while the younger chick remains a possibility held in reserve until the older one demonstrates that it can survive. Once that happens, the smaller sibling may no longer receive the protection or resources needed to remain alive. The pattern makes sense within the difficult arithmetic of raising a shoebill. Food is unpredictable, prey can be large and dangerous, and adults must leave the nest to hunt. Raising two large chicks at once demands more food and more time than a pair of parents can reliably secure in every season. A second egg allows the parents to begin again if the first embryo fails, the first chick dies, or some other event interrupts the first attempt. Siblicide occurs among several other birds, including some eagles and boobies, though the details vary between species. In the shoebill, the behavior is especially striking because the young bird is large, powerful, and capable of inflicting serious injury with its bill even before reaching adulthood. The nest becomes a place where competition begins almost immediately, while the adults continue their own cycle of feeding and incubation without resolving the conflict themselves. Once a chick survives this early stage, its parents face a remarkably long commitment. Incubation lasts about 95 days, followed by roughly another 95 days before the young bird becomes capable of sustained flight. That means a single offspring can occupy the center of the parent's reproductive effort for more than 6 months. During that period, adults carry food to the nest, shade the chick, provide water, and protect it from the conditions surrounding the breeding site. The discarded sibling is therefore more than a tragic detail of the nest. It reveals how reproduction can be shaped by uncertainty. The shoebill begins with two possibilities, then concentrates its limited resources on the chick most likely to survive. Evolution has produced a system in which redundancy exists at the beginning while investment becomes intensely focused afterward. Within the nest, survival is decided through size, timing, hunger, and opportunity. The parents maintain the conditions for life, while the chicks compete over who receives them. By the time the surviving young bird finally leaves the nest, months of growth have transformed a vulnerable hatchling into a juvenile built to occupy the same wetland world as its parents for the remainder of its youth. When the dry season draws water away from the Congo's shallow channels, the African lungfish follows the disappearing river downward. Its body, long and narrow, slips into soft mud until only a small opening remains connected to the surface. There, surrounded by its own hardened mucus, the fish can wait for conditions that would kill most aquatic animals. The lungfish belongs to an exceptionally old branch of the fish family tree. Its lineage reaches back roughly 400 million years, and fossils from the Devonian period preserve a body plan strikingly similar to the animal alive today. Four slender paired fins extend from its body, functioning as supports that can help it move through mud and vegetation. Its resemblance to early lobe-finned fish is more than visual. The group that includes lungfish sits close to the evolutionary lineage that eventually produced the first vertebrates capable of living on land. Air is essential to the lungfish. Alongside its gills, it possesses functional lungs that allow it to breathe atmospheric oxygen. In warm, stagnant water where oxygen levels fall, the fish must rise to the surface regularly. Without access to air, it can suffocate even while completely surrounded by water. Its lungs therefore serve as a second respiratory system, allowing it to occupy seasonal wetlands where conditions change dramatically. As the water recedes, another ability becomes more important. The fish excavates a chamber in the mud and secretes layers of mucus around its body. The material dries into a protective cocoon, leaving a narrow passage near the mouth through which air can enter. Inside this enclosure, activity falls to an extremely low level. The heart slows, movement nearly disappears, and the animal enters estivation, a form of dormancy associated with prolonged heat and drought. This state can last for years. Laboratory studies have shown African lungfish surviving several years in estivation before being rehydrated and returned to active life. During the period of deprivation, the fish has no access to ordinary feeding. Its metabolism shifts toward conservation, and stored body proteins become part of the energy supply. Muscle tissue is broken down, and its components are recycled, allowing essential organs to continue functioning while the rest of the body remains largely inactive. When rain finally returns, water reaches the buried chamber and softens the protective covering. The lungfish emerges gradually, its body returning to active metabolism as the surrounding mud becomes saturated. It moves back toward open water and resumes feeding, breathing and swimming. The same individual that endured years underground can return to a life that appears ordinary within a surprisingly short period. The evolutionary significance of this animal reaches far beyond its ability to survive drought. Lungfish share a common ancestor with the lineage that gave rise to amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The lungs and paired appendages that seem unusual on a fish therefore belong to a much larger story about how vertebrate bodies changed as life expanded onto land. The lungfish remained aquatic while retaining traits associated with that deeper ancestry. Its genetic material preserves another record of that history. The African lungfish has one of the largest animal genomes ever sequenced, containing an extraordinary amount of hereditary information accumulated across hundreds of millions of years. Within this living fish is a biological archive from an Earth when vertebrates had only begun exploring the boundary between water and land. A faint pulse travels outward from a Mormyrid fish as it moves through the river. The signal comes from a specialized electric organ near the tail, producing a field around the body. Water carries that field into the surrounding space, where every nearby object leaves a small disturbance in its shape. A stone, another fish, a plant stem, or a potential meal can each alter the pattern in a different way. The fish detects those changes through specialized receptors in its skin. Instead of waiting for an image to form, it continually samples the electrical environment around itself. The process resembles sonar in principle, although the physical system is entirely different. A bat sends sound through the air and interprets returning echoes. A mormyrid sends electrical pulses through water and reads the distortions created by whatever occupies the field. This ability becomes especially useful when vision loses its value. Muddy water, dense vegetation, and darkness can make ordinary sight unreliable, while electrical signals continue moving through the surrounding water. The fish can locate objects at close range, judge their position, and adjust its movements without depending entirely on light. Its surroundings become a changing electrical landscape registered through patterns too subtle for human senses to detect. The Congo Basin contains an extraordinary diversity of these fishes. More than 200 Mormyrid species are known across Africa, with many found in the Congo River system. Their different body shapes and feeding habits allow them to occupy separate ecological roles, while their shared electrical heritage links them to an evolutionary experiment that has unfolded through generations of river life. The electrical system also serves a social purpose. Each fish produces a distinctive pattern of electrical discharge. Individuals can recognize signals from other members of their species, helping them distinguish familiar fish from strangers. The pulses can carry information connected with identity, courtship, and interactions between rivals. A river that appears visually empty can therefore contain a network of signals moving around the bodies of fish that recognize one another without making ordinary sounds. Courtship can depend on these patterns, while encounters between rivals may involve changes in discharge that reveal the condition or strength of another individual. The water carries these exchanges across short distances, creating a social layer that remains inaccessible to creatures relying on vision. Producing these signals requires energy, and processing them requires an unusually capable nervous system. Mormyrids have relatively large brains for their body size, reflecting the demands of navigating an environment through electrical information. Their brains must separate useful disturbances from the countless changes created by flowing water and nearby organisms, then convert those patterns into decisions about movement, feeding, and social behavior. The remarkable part is how completely this sensory world belongs to the fish. Human beings can measure the electrical discharges with instruments, but our own senses cannot directly perceive the information being exchanged. A Mormyrid experiences its surroundings through a channel that exists outside ordinary human perception, turning the river into something more than water and darkness. Every pulse leaves a brief signature, and every returning disturbance adds another piece to the fish's immediate surroundings. Through that continuous exchange, a small river animal maintains awareness of its position, its neighbors, and the living space around it, carrying an electrical map through water where sight alone could never provide enough information. The story of the Bili chimpanzees begins with objects that spent generations waiting in a museum drawer. In 1898, a Belgian army officer brought several unusual skulls from the region around Bili in northern Congo. Their size and heavy brow ridges seemed unusual for chimpanzees, while the resemblance to gorillas created a puzzle of classification. No established gorilla population was known from the area, so the specimens were treated as anomalies and eventually became part of a much larger collection of African remains. Nearly a century passed before the old skulls became relevant again. During the early 2000s, researcher Carl Amann followed reports from hunters describing unusually large apes in the Bili forest. Some accounts attributed extraordinary strength to them, including encounters with lions. Amann searched for physical evidence and found tracks that appeared larger than typical chimpanzee footprints. He also encountered reports of nests built on the ground, an unusual behavior for chimpanzees and one that added another layer to the mystery surrounding the population. Direct encounters brought a different kind of evidence. Primatologist Shelley Williams described an encounter in which several apes approached her group through the vegetation. They moved with enough confidence and size to create an impression unlike the ordinary chimpanzee encounters researchers were accustomed to. Their behavior was difficult to place neatly within familiar categories. The animals did not behave like gorillas, because genetic evidence would later show that they belonged to the eastern chimpanzee lineage, yet they displayed traits that had encouraged comparisons with gorillas. Genetic analysis eventually settled the central question. The Bili apes are chimpanzees, specifically eastern chimpanzees. Their unusual appearance and behavior, therefore, belong within the natural variation of a species rather than representing a separate great ape. That distinction matters because the population demonstrates how strongly local conditions can shape the lives of animals that share the same broad ancestry. The Bili forest is exceptionally large and difficult to survey. Its isolation has allowed the chimpanzees to experience ecological conditions different from those faced by many better studied populations. Researchers have reported differences in nesting behavior, ranging patterns, body appearance, and responses to people. Some observations have been debated, and claims about exceptional aggression or lion killing remain difficult to verify consistently. The most reliable conclusion is more restrained and more interesting. These chimpanzees occupy a distinctive cultural and ecological setting that has remained poorly studied for generations. Chimpanzees learn many behaviors from one another, meaning that separation can preserve local traditions as well as physical differences. A group may develop its own methods for feeding, traveling, nesting, or responding to neighboring animals, then pass those behaviors to younger members through observation. Isolation, therefore, becomes more than a geographical condition. It can become a long experiment in inherited behavior, with each generation receiving a social landscape shaped by the generations before it. The Bili chimpanzees remind us that evolutionary change does not always arrive as a dramatic new species appearing overnight. Sometimes it accumulates through distance, forest structure, inherited behavior, and thousands of ordinary lives. A population can remain connected to its wider lineage while becoming distinctly adapted to its own corner of the world, carrying a history that only becomes visible when someone finally reaches the forest and looks closely, where old assumptions meet living evidence. High among the leaves, where branches form narrow paths between trunks, an armored body moves with the weight and presence of something far larger. The Goliath beetle is the heaviest insect known, and its proportions make familiar ideas about insects feel strangely inadequate. An adult can reach about 15 centimeters, which is about 6 inches, and weigh nearly 100 grams, or about 3.5 ounces. Its grub can grow to around 10 centimeters, which is about 4 inches, while reaching a similar weight. The difference becomes even more striking when the beetle begins to use its strength. Relative to body mass, Goliath beetles can carry or move loads many times heavier than themselves. Popular estimates have placed their lifting ability at hundreds of times their own weight, although exact comparisons depend on how strength is measured. Even without translating that force into a human equivalent, the mechanical advantage is extraordinary. A creature small enough to rest across a hand can exert enough force to push, climb, and hold onto surfaces that would seem immense beside its body. Much of that strength is built into the beetle's structure. Its body is protected by a hardened outer covering made from layers of chitin, a tough biological material that forms the exoskeleton of insects. Six-jointed legs distribute its weight across bark and branches, while powerful muscles operate the limbs from inside the armored frame. The result is a compact machine for gripping, climbing, feeding, and moving through vegetation. Male Goliath beetles carry another structure that changes the way they interact with one another. A forked horn projects from the head, creating a shape that resembles the letter Y. It is used during contests between males, particularly around food and access to mates. Two rivals can approach, lock their horns together, and push against each other until one loses its position. The contest is governed by leverage. A slight shift in angle can turn a strong grip into a disadvantage, allowing one beetle to lift or overturn its opponent. Their lives begin in a different world. The larvae develop among decaying wood and other rich organic material, where they spend their early stages feeding and growing. Their soft bodies bear little resemblance to the finished beetle. Gradually, the larva forms a pupa, undergoes metamorphosis, and emerges with wings, hardened armor, and the distinctive head structure of the adult. The Congo Basin provides a layered habitat in which insects occupy nearly every available space. Some feed on leaves high in the canopy. Others live inside rotting wood, beneath bark, within flowers, or among the soil and leaf litter. Many remain poorly documented, especially in places that researchers rarely reach. The known diversity therefore represents only part of the insect community moving through the forest. The Goliath beetle has become famous for its size, yet its importance extends beyond being an unusually large insect. It demonstrates how far physical specialization can go when a body is shaped around a particular environment. Armor, muscle, leverage, wings, and a powerful feeding apparatus all fit within an animal measured in centimeters. Above the forest floor, that combination allows one of Earth's largest insects to move through the canopy as though the branches were built specifically to carry it. Its size also changes the scale of every encounter, making ordinary leaves, bark, and branches part of its landscape. A living current moves across the forest floor with no visible leader at its center. Driver ants travel as a coordinated mass, their movement emerging from countless local encounters rather than instructions from a queen or a central command. Each worker responds to chemical signals left by others, following pheromone trails that mark useful paths and reinforce the direction of travel. No single ant needs to understand the colony. The pattern exists in the connections between them. The genus Dorylus contains some of the most formidable army ants in Africa. A mature colony can contain millions of workers, and enormous swarms may gather into columns stretching across the ground. Their bodies are small, yet their numbers transform the scale of the landscape. A trail that seems at first like scattered movement can become a dense stream, with workers climbing over one another and maintaining contact as they advance. Leaves become bridges, roots become walls, and narrow gaps become passages through which the procession continually flows. At the front, workers use powerful mandibles to seize and cut prey. Others follow behind, replacing those that have reached the edge of the hunt. The division of labor emerges from changing chemical cues and physical contact, allowing the column to maintain its momentum while individual ants remain expendable parts of a much larger system. Insects and millipedes are common targets. Frogs, small reptiles, and other animals can also be overwhelmed when they cannot escape the advancing mass. The forest responds to this movement in its own way. Creatures do not need to see the ants directly to recognize what their approach means. Vibrations, disturbance, and the sudden disappearance of small animals can mark the arrival of the colony before the main column reaches them. Animals capable of recognizing the approach leave the area before the column arrives. Gorillas may move away. Forest buffalo can shift their position. Leopards, despite their strength and speed, also avoid direct contact. The response has been shaped by repeated encounters across generations, linking the behavior of large mammals to the movement of an insect colony they could crush individually. There is another role within this strange procession. Driver ants consume carrion as readily as living prey, removing remains that would otherwise persist on the forest floor. A carcass can be stripped rapidly, returning much of its material to the wider food web through the ants themselves and through the animals that feed on them. Their movement, therefore, connects predation, decomposition, and nutrient cycling in one traveling system. The colony has no permanent nest in the ordinary sense. Many driver ants relocate their temporary bivouac as conditions change, carrying larvae and queens with them while workers form living structures around the colony. The entire society becomes mobile, adapting its position to food availability and the surrounding terrain. What makes the swarm so unusual is the absence of a single mind directing it. There is no worker carrying a complete map of the forest, no commander deciding where every body should move. Order emerges from simple interactions repeated across thousands or millions of individuals. Each ant knows almost nothing about the whole, while the whole can behave with extraordinary coordination. That coordination gives the colony a power far beyond the strength of any individual worker. Across the forest floor, countless small decisions become one moving force, reshaping the paths of creatures many times larger than itself. The river does much of the speaking here, rushing over stone while a creature larger than any other frog settles among its banks. The Goliath frog is the largest frog known on Earth, with a body exceeding 30 centimeters, which is about 12 inches, and a weight approaching 3 kilograms, which is about 7 pounds. Its hind legs can propel it more than 3 meters, that is nearly 10 feet, across the river margin in a single leap. For an animal of this size, the movement is startlingly efficient, carrying a body built for water into brief flights over stone and vegetation. Its world is unusually demanding. The species lives in fast-flowing rivers of the western Congo Basin, where strong currents keep the water richly supplied with oxygen. The same force that makes these channels suitable for the frog also limits where it can rest, feed, and reproduce. Smooth banks and submerged rocks offer little shelter, while the current continually reshapes the edges. Life here depends on choosing precise places within the river, where speed and stability meet. There is an unusual absence in the frog's courtship. Most frogs advertise their presence through calls, using a vocal sac to amplify sound across breeding habitat. The Goliath frog has no vocal sac and produces no known mating call. In water filled with rushing currents, where visibility can be limited by spray, depth, and vegetation, this removes one of the most familiar ways frogs locate one another. For much of the 20th century, the details of its reproduction remained poorly understood. Then researchers began finding something unexpected along the river margins. Male Goliath frogs were moving stones, clearing sections of the riverbed and arranging them into shallow pools. Some of the stones can weigh more than 2 kilograms, which is about 4.5 pounds. The finished depressions provide calmer spaces where females can deposit their eggs, giving developing young protection from the strongest current. The work is physical, deliberate, and repeated at the places where the river permits a nest to survive. The discovery changed the picture of the species. This was a frog shaping its surroundings with material gathered from the river itself. The nest was more than a hollow in mud or a convenient pocket between rocks. It was a constructed boundary between moving water and developing life. The male's labor created a small refuge within a powerful stream, with the shape and placement of each pool affecting whether eggs remained in place. Scientific knowledge of this frog has arrived in fragments. Western science formally documented the species in the early 20th century, yet fundamental details of its breeding behavior were still being uncovered more than a century later. The pattern reflects how difficult these rivers are to study, especially when the animal offers no loud call to reveal its presence. Its size is shaped by that setting. Powerful legs help it cross gaps between rocks, while the broad body remains suited to water. During breeding, males maintain pools as currents shift stones around them. The Goliath frog, therefore, belongs to a narrow world of water, stone, current, and carefully chosen shelter. Its size makes it conspicuous in photographs, yet its life depends on fitting precisely into places where the river allows it to remain. Above those channels, another kind of concealment takes shape among leaves and branches, where appearance itself can become part of the forest. Among upper leaves, a green mamba can become difficult to separate from the living structure around it. Its body carries the same fresh green impression as leaves catching filtered equatorial light, while slender branches and shifting foliage break its outline into fragments. A bird searching for food may pass within reach without registering the snake as a distinct object. The changing canopy gives the mamba countless places where shape can dissolve into the background. The Jameson's mamba is an agile tree snake, built for movement through branches rather than for life on the ground. Its body can reach more than 2 meters, which is about 6.5 feet, with a long tail that helps it balance as it travels through the canopy. Muscles along its body allow controlled movement across narrow branches, while the snake can hold positions that make its outline difficult to recognize. In this setting, movement does not necessarily reveal it. A slight shift may look like another leaf responding to the forest air. Its hunting style depends heavily on this advantage. The snake often remains poised among branches until a suitable bird or small mammal enters range. Then the head moves forward with extraordinary speed, followed by a bite that can deliver venom before the prey has time to understand what happened. Observers can miss the beginning, especially when the snake is aligned with foliage and the strike occurs within a fraction of a second. The venom acts primarily on the nervous system. Neurotoxins interfere with the signals that allow nerves to communicate with muscles, and severe envenomation can eventually impair breathing. The venom is adapted to the kinds of prey the snake normally captures, especially birds and small mammals. Encounters with people are uncommon, and documented deaths are rare compared with the number of venomous snakes living across Africa. Its biology is shaped around hunting in branches, where speed and concealment are more valuable than confrontation with large animals. Another detail makes the mamba especially suited to this world. Its long body can travel through the canopy without requiring a heavy descent to the ground between movements. It may cross branches, follow vines, and shift through dense foliage while maintaining contact with supporting surfaces. The forest gives it a three-dimensional hunting ground, filled with perches, nesting sites, and narrow routes between trees. For the animals living there, this predator becomes part of the background rather than an obvious presence. Birds remain alert to movement above and around them, while small mammals use branches and foliage as pathways that also contain danger. Natural selection has shaped these relationships across generations. A prey animal only needs to survive enough encounters for vigilance and caution to become part of its inherited behavior. The green mamba therefore occupies an unusual place in the forest. Its power comes from combining venom with concealment, speed with balance, and a body shaped for a world suspended above the ground. It does not need to dominate the canopy to influence it. A predator that can remain almost indistinguishable from leaves changes how every nearby creature moves through those leaves. In a forest where visibility can fail long before darkness arrives, the most effective hunter may be the one that becomes part of the scenery. Where the Congo River widens across the basin, the water becomes more than a channel between forests. In places, it stretches for more than 10 kilometers, which is about 6.2 miles, and its depth can exceed 200 meters, which is about 656 feet. Powerful currents make the crossing difficult, even for strong swimmers. For an ape living among trees, wetlands, and tangled banks, this river forms a formidable boundary. That boundary separates two remarkably close relatives. Common chimpanzees live north of the river, while bonobos occupy much of the forest to its south. Their genetic similarity is extraordinarily high, yet the populations have remained distinct for hundreds of thousands of years. Across that interval, each lineage encountered its own pressures, foods, predators, and social opportunities. The same broad ancestral inheritance gradually produced two different ways of being an ape. Seasonal changes in the river may also alter the practical shape of that boundary, yet the Great Channel remains difficult to cross at many points. Islands and tributaries can complicate movement further, creating a landscape where neighboring forests may appear close on a map while remaining separated in daily life. For generations, those forests could function as different worlds, each carrying its own community structure and ecological rhythm. The scientific story of the bonobo began with a skull preserved in a museum. In 1927, Belgian zoologist Henri Schouteden examined a specimen labeled as an adult female chimpanzee. Its proportions seemed unusual, and the uncertainty around its identity remained. The following year, German zoologist Ernst Schwarz studied additional material and recognized that these animals represented a distinct population associated with the southern side of the Congo River. Isolation allowed differences to accumulate in body form and behavior. Bonobos developed a more slender build, longer limbs, and a social system in which females commonly form strong alliances. Those relationships can influence access to food and shape interactions with males. Tension within a group is often managed through affiliative contact, including grooming and other forms of social bonding. Their societies remain complex, with hierarchies, friendships, rivalries, and shifting alliances unfolding through everyday interaction. Their relationship with neighboring communities of chimpanzees is equally striking. Common chimpanzees have been observed engaging in lethal violence between groups, including coordinated attacks on rivals. Wild bonobos have shown a markedly different pattern. Researchers have not documented the deliberate killing of one bonobo by another in their natural communities. The distinction does not make either species morally simple. It shows how different social systems can emerge from closely related beginnings when populations follow separate evolutionary histories. Genetically, bonobos and chimpanzees each share roughly 98.7% of their genetic material with humans, making both our closest living relatives. Their resemblance to us reaches deep into anatomy, development, and behavior, while their differences reveal how much evolutionary change can arise from a relatively small separation in ancestry. The Congo River therefore became more than geography. Its currents helped preserve a biological divide, allowing one population to continue along one path while another followed a different course on the opposite bank. A river measured in water and distance became, across generations, a boundary written into bodies, relationships, and inherited behavior. The bonobo remains one of its most remarkable consequences, an ape whose world was shaped by separation and whose society carries the particular history of a forest divided by moving water. At midday, the forest floor can receive only a fraction of the sunlight that reaches the leaves above. Estimates place it around 1 to 2%, leaving the ground in a dim world where direct vision offers little guidance. Roots, fallen leaves, wet soil, and tangled stems become the immediate landscape. For many creatures living there, darkness is less a challenge than a constant physical property of home. Their surroundings carry information, even when eyes reveal little. That has shaped the senses themselves. Along the Congo Basin floor, some animals detect movement through vibrations passing through soil and leaf litter. Others follow chemical traces left by neighboring animals, building an understanding of their surroundings from substances carried through the air or deposited on surfaces. The forest becomes readable through signals that a human observer might never notice. Among the most unusual are caecilians, legless amphibians that spend much of their lives underground. Their bodies resemble smooth, living tubes, adapted for pushing through soil and narrow passages. Their eyes remain, but they are reduced and often covered by skin or bone. Specialized tentacles near the head help detect chemical information, giving these animals a sensory route suited to a world where light rarely reaches. The soil itself carries information. Every disturbance can travel through it as a vibration, from the movement of another animal to the shifting pressure of something passing nearby. Some underground animals can respond to these signals without ever seeing their source. In such a setting, the boundary between hearing and feeling becomes less distinct, because information can arrive through the body rather than through the ears alone. Shrews add another layer to this sensory landscape. Several shrew species can produce ultrasonic sounds and use returning echoes to gather information about nearby objects. Their signals are not identical to the sophisticated echolocation of bats, yet the principle is related. A small mammal moving through roots and leaf litter can send sound into the darkness and receive information from what lies around it, gaining spatial clues where eyesight provides little assistance. Chemical communication creates another network across the ground. Millipedes, among the major decomposers of forest litter, release chemical substances that influence the behavior of others of their kind. These traces can help with orientation, finding resources, and locating potential mates. What appears to be ordinary soil and decaying leaves can therefore contain routes and signals that are legible to animals moving through them. Even movement itself becomes a form of information. A beetle disturbing a leaf, a shrew pressing through litter, or a burrowing amphibian shifting soil can alter the immediate sensory field for everything nearby. Each creature receives only fragments, then responds to those fragments according to its own specialized biology. There is no single map of the forest floor. There are many overlapping versions, each assembled through a different sense. For a human visitor, this layer of the Congo can seem visually empty. For its residents, it is densely written. Vibrations pass through soil, chemical traces mark paths, echoes outline nearby shapes, and pressure reveals movement. The forest floor has become a place where evolution can work with information that light never provides. Its darkness has shaped organisms that do not merely endure a world without vision. They inhabit a world made from signals that vision was never designed to read. A layer of dark, waterlogged soil beneath the Congo Basin holds a record older than most written records. In the Cuvette Centrale, roots and fallen leaves rest above peat that has accumulated through thousands of years. The material forms where water remains close to the surface, slowing the processes that normally return dead vegetation to the living cycle. The story came into focus during fieldwork in 2012 when Simon Lewis and Greta Dargy were studying soil in the central Congo Basin. Their work concerned the composition of the ground beneath the forest. What emerged from those measurements was a landscape far larger than the small field sites where it was first examined. Their findings, published in 2017, revealed a peatland covering about 145,500 square kilometers, which is about 56,200 square miles. Its area is larger than England. Peat forms where plant material falls into waterlogged ground and remains in conditions with very little oxygen. Microorganisms can still break material down, though the process becomes extremely slow. Layer after layer can accumulate, preserving fragments of vegetation and traces of the life that occupied the forest above. In the Congo Basin, the average peat depth is around 2.4 meters, which is about 8 feet. Some areas reach nearly 6 meters, which is about 20 feet. Each core pulled from this material becomes a narrow record of changing forests. Pollen can reveal which plants were growing in earlier periods. Seeds and other organic remains can preserve clues about vegetation, water conditions, and shifts in the surrounding landscape. The deeper layers reach back roughly 10,000 years, carrying evidence from a period when human societies, climate patterns, and forests occupied a very different world. The peat also stores an extraordinary quantity of carbon. Estimates place the total at roughly 30 billion metric tons. That carbon entered the ground through plant growth and became trapped as the wetland continued accumulating organic material. The forest and peat form a connected system, with living vegetation drawing carbon from the atmosphere while saturated soil keeps much of that material from returning rapidly. Drainage changes the chemistry of this buried archive. When water levels fall, oxygen can penetrate deeper into the peat, Microbial decomposition accelerates, and carbon that accumulated over millennia can begin returning to the atmosphere. A landscape that took thousands of years to build can therefore be altered within decades. What makes the Cuvette Centrale especially remarkable is the way its importance remained obscured by the forest growing above it. Dense vegetation concealed the shape of the land, while standing water concealed what lay underneath. From above, the surface offered few clues about the depth or extent of the buried material. It was a functioning carbon store, a historical record, and a habitat all at once, existing below the level where most surveys had looked. For scientists, the discovery changed the picture of the Congo Basin by revealing that its forests rest upon a second layer of ecological history. Above ground, trees record the present through their growth. Below them, peat preserves fragments of thousands of former landscapes. The forest therefore carries time in two directions, through living growth above and preserved history below, upward in living trunks and outward through leaves, downward in layers of compressed organic matter that have been waiting there for millennia within the same living landscape. In the closing years of the 19th century, reports circulated through European accounts of the Ituri forest. Local communities already knew an unusual animal with a dark body and striped legs, yet to European naturalists it matched no familiar species. Descriptions of a horse-like creature were easy to place in folklore when no specimen could be examined. The forest had room for stories, and science had no place ready for this one. That changed through a chain of specimens. In 1901, Sir Harry Johnston obtained pieces of striped skin and later received skulls from the Ituri region. The material reached London, where zoologists examined the animal's anatomy. The skull carried a clue that the striped appearance had concealed. Its structure connected the creature to the giraffe family, creating a combination that seemed almost assembled from different animals. The okapi stands at roughly 1.5 meters at the shoulder, which is about 5 feet. Its body is dark chestnut, while the hindquarters and legs carry pale bands that break apart its outline among vegetation and filtered light. The result is an animal whose shape can blend into the understory. A giraffe relative had taken on the proportions of a forest browser, where a towering neck would offer little advantage among close branches and dense growth. Its feeding anatomy carries another piece of that adaptation. The tongue can reach about 30 centimeters, which is nearly 1 foot, and its dark surface is flexible enough to grasp leaves and shoots. The same tongue can reach the animal's own eyelids and ears, allowing the okapi to groom places that would otherwise be difficult to clean. A feature that helps gather food also becomes part of everyday maintenance. Communication leaves traces on the ground. Glands associated with the feet release scent as an okapi walks, creating chemical marks that can convey information to other individuals. Most okapis live alone across overlapping forest ranges, so these traces provide a way for animals to register one another without remaining together. Their lives are dispersed through the forest, connected by signals that linger after the animal itself has moved away. The okapi also carries several unmistakable links to its taller relative. Males possess small, skin-covered structures called ossicones, while females have different structures on the forehead. Its ears can move independently, helping it monitor sounds from different directions. Its digestive system reflects its relationship with other ruminants, allowing it to process leaves, shoots, and other vegetation gathered from the forest. For local communities, the animal was already part of the landscape. Its formal recognition by Western science came much later, turning a familiar forest creature into a new scientific discovery. The event revealed a gap between what a place contains and what outsiders have recorded about it. The okapi had never needed a scientific name to exist. It had only needed the forest, its food, its paths, and generations of animals moving through them. That is what makes the okapi's story linger. A large mammal had lived within a known region while remaining absent from formal zoological knowledge, protected by dense vegetation, distance, and a way of life that rarely brought it into view. Its discovery did more than add another species to a catalog. It showed how easily an entire animal could remain outside the boundaries of recognition, even while the people sharing its forest had known it all along. In 2007, a monkey appeared in a schoolmaster's house in a remote Congolese village. John Hart saw a face unlike the species his team expected to encounter, marked by unusual coloring and an expression that seemed almost familiar. The animal had been kept as a pet, yet no one could confidently place it. That moment began a 5-year investigation into a primate that had been living for generations in the Lomami Basin, beyond the boundaries of formal scientific knowledge. Fieldwork gradually assembled the pieces. Researchers followed local reports, gathered observations, examined behavior, and compared genetic evidence. By 2012, the animal had been formally described as the Lesula, a monkey whose existence was new to science, even though its lineage had occupied the forest for millions of years. Its discovery carried a particular kind of strangeness. Nothing had appeared where there had been emptiness. A complete population had been moving through its own world while scientific records remained unaware of it. Another story was already beginning among the treetops. In 2008, researchers working in the region captured a blurred photograph of a dark monkey high in the canopy. The image offered only fragments, a body shape, a suggestion of facial markings, and enough detail to make identification difficult. Specialists examined it, yet no existing species provided a convincing match. The photograph was preserved, and the animal continued living above the forest floor. Years passed before clearer evidence emerged. Between 2018 and 2022, field teams recorded 114 observations of the elusive monkey across a range of about 1,700 square kilometers, which is about 656 square miles. Most sightings involved small groups, high in dense canopy, where branches, foliage, and distance made photography unusually difficult. Researchers also compared skulls, teeth, body markings, and vocalizations, building a case from several independent lines of evidence. In July 2026, the monkey was formally described as Colobus congoensis, with Likweli retained as its local name. It became only the 5th new African monkey species described during the previous 75 years. Its face carries a distinctive orange cream area around the mouth, contrasting with black fur and pale markings farther back on the body. Its calls resemble those of a close relative in some ways, while their structure differs enough to provide another clue to separate lineages. Genetic evidence places the split between Likweli and its closest relative between about 4.7 and 5.8 million years ago. The two lineages had been evolving apart for a span of time longer than many familiar human civilizations have existed. Their separation was written into genes, anatomy, geography, and sound, then finally recognized through patient fieldwork. The Lesula and Likweli reveal something larger about discovery itself. Their stories also show how geography can protect a lineage from recognition. A forest can be extensively studied in broad terms, while particular valleys, ridges, and canopy corridors remain difficult to enter, observe, and revisit with enough consistency. Both were living animals before anyone assigned them a scientific description, Both were already feeding, breeding, communicating, and shaping the forest around them. Their lives did not begin with discovery. Only our knowledge of those lives did. In the river's brown water, a small pulse can carry an identity more precise than a face. Mormyrid fish generate electrical discharges through specialized organs in their bodies, creating patterns that differ from one individual to another. Each fish carries its own electrical signature, a changing sequence of pulses that can be detected through the surrounding water. In a habitat where vision fades within suspended sediment, this becomes a second language written directly into the river. The signals serve practical purposes, yet their social meaning is more intricate. A fish can recognize another individual by the pattern of its discharge, allowing familiar neighbors and previous encounters to become part of its electrical landscape. Rival fish can also be assessed through their signals. Differences in pulse, strength, and timing provide information about body size, condition, and social status. Potential mates produce their own distinctive patterns, giving courtship another layer of information that travels without sight or sound. The water itself becomes part of the sensory system. Electrical pulses spread outward from the body, and specialized receptors detect disturbances in the resulting field. Nearby objects alter the pattern, allowing the fish to perceive shapes, movement, and changes in its surroundings. The same sense that helps an individual avoid an obstacle can therefore contribute to social recognition. Navigation and communication overlap inside one continuous stream of information. This ability matters most where ordinary vision offers little help. Congo Basin rivers can carry suspended particles that turn water opaque, especially around submerged roots, vegetation, and shifting channels. Mormyrids can continue moving through such spaces while exchanging information that remains inaccessible to animals relying on sight. Their electrical signals are also short range, which keeps the system local. A fish is reading the immediate world around its body, including the individuals close enough to matter. Their brains reflect the demands of this sensory life. Mormyrid species tend to possess unusually large brains relative to their body size, with enlarged regions associated with processing electrical information. Researchers have linked this neural investment with tasks such as recognizing signals, interpreting environmental changes, and building internal representations of surroundings. The energy required to maintain such tissue is substantial, yet the information it handles allows these fish to occupy places where another sensory system would be far less effective. Across the Congo Basin, this evolutionary experiment produced extraordinary diversity. More than 200 Mormyrid species are known from the basin, making it one of the richest centers of electric fish diversity on Earth. Their ancestors shared an electrical sensing system, then different populations adapted it to different river habitats, diets, and social conditions. Some became specialists in particular channels or feeding environments, while others developed distinct signaling patterns suited to their own ecological lives. The remarkable part is the intimacy of the system. A river that appears visually empty can contain countless exchanges of information, each pulse traveling through water and returning as a perception inside another nervous system. To a human observer, the scene may offer little to see. For a Mormyrid, every nearby body can carry a signature, every object can disturb the field, and every movement can become information. The river is filled with messages that exist entirely outside our senses. In that world, identity is carried by electricity, and a body becomes both sender and receiver, continuously reading the water around it. A strand of lungfish genetic material carries a record far older than any written history. The African lungfish possesses the largest animal genome that has been sequenced, measuring roughly 43 billion genetic building blocks. That is more than 13 times the size of the human genome. Much of this extraordinary bulk comes from repeated sequences that have accumulated across immense stretches of evolutionary time, leaving the genome like a layered archive of changes inherited, copied, expanded. Its lungs reveal another part of that history. African lungfish can breathe atmospheric air using a pair of elongated lungs connected to the digestive tract. Their ancestors developed air breathing while living in waters where oxygen could become scarce. Similar environmental pressures helped shape air breathing in several ancient fish lineages, while one branch eventually gave rise to the vertebrates that colonized land. The modern lungfish is therefore a living representative of a much older experiment in extracting oxygen from air. Lungfish are sarcopterygians, a lineage that includes the closest living fish relatives of land vertebrates. Their ancestors possessed paired fins with internal bones and muscles arranged in ways that foreshadowed the limbs of animals that later moved onto land. The lungfish, therefore, occupies an unusual place in the story of breathing, movement, and the transition between water and terrestrial life, preserving features that help scientists reconstruct one of biology's great transitions. When its water habitat becomes inhospitable, the lungfish can enter estivation. It burrows into drying mud, surrounds itself with a protective layer of mucus, and reduces its activity and metabolism dramatically. During this period, waste products such as ammonia are converted and managed in unusual ways, while tissues remain protected until water returns. The cellular details of this survival strategy remain an active field of research. Scientists are interested in how lungfish tissues tolerate prolonged metabolic depression, how proteins and cell membranes remain functional, and how organs recover after extended periods of restricted activity. Understanding how living cells withstand severe physiological stress could inform research into preserving organs, protecting tissues during reduced oxygen availability, and improving recovery after periods when normal metabolism has been interrupted. The genome makes this biological resilience even more intriguing. Its immense size reflects a long history of duplication and expansion, while its sequence contains clues to the molecular changes that accompanied major transitions in vertebrate evolution. Researchers can compare lungfish genes with those of amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, tracing which genetic features appeared early and which emerged later. The scale of the genome also changes how scientists read the animal. A single sequence can contain repeated regions that are difficult to assemble and compare, making the lungfish genome itself a technical challenge as well as a biological treasure. Each improvement in sequencing reveals another layer of its history, including changes in genes involved in development, metabolism, respiration, and the handling of environmental stress. Inside this single fish, deep evolutionary time becomes something that can be measured, copied, and examined. The lungfish still swims through African waters, with a body adapted to conditions its distant ancestors knew hundreds of millions of years ago. Its genome carries another record, one written in molecular sequences rather than fossils, preserving traces of an evolutionary path that reaches toward every air-breathing vertebrate alive. Between 2013 and 2023, researchers formally described 742 species from the Congo Basin. They came from almost every branch of the living world, including plants, insects, spiders, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Each name added another piece to a biological inventory that is still being assembled, even after generations of scientific work in the region. The scale becomes more striking when the discoveries are placed among familiar animals. Some newly recognized species are small enough to pass through leaf litter without notice. Others are substantial reptiles or venomous snakes, including cobras, whose bodies and behavior had already been known to people living near their ranges. New fish emerged from rivers and forest streams. New birds appeared in places where their calls had blended into the larger chorus for generations. New mammals entered the scientific record after living ordinary lives beyond the reach of formal surveys. A forest can hold more discoveries than expeditions can reach. Researchers need time to travel through difficult terrain, establish camps, collect specimens, record behavior, compare anatomy, and obtain genetic evidence. Funding determines how long those journeys can continue, while political conditions can decide whether a particular region is accessible at all. Each field season, therefore, opens only a fraction of the landscape, leaving enormous areas beyond direct observation. Some distinctions require instruments and genetic comparisons before they become visible to science. The Central African slender-snouted crocodile offers one example. In 2018, researchers established that it represented a species distinct from the West African slender-snouted crocodile. The animals had already occupied the Congo Basin for countless generations. Their separate evolutionary history existed long before anyone placed the difference into a scientific classification. The Likweli carries the same lesson into the present. Its recognition followed years of observation and comparison, with confirmation arriving in July of 2026. Genetic evidence showed separation from its closest relative across several million years of evolution. For all that time, the population had remained part of the forest community, feeding, breeding, moving through its range, and contributing to the life around it. The number 742 therefore describes only what has been formally named during one period. It does not represent the full number of species waiting for recognition. Thousands of insects, amphibians, plants, and other organisms are thought to remain undescribed, although exact totals are difficult to establish. The boundary between discovery and disappearance has become especially important because habitat loss can remove species before science has recorded them. There is another layer to every new scientific name. A species may be new to a catalog while being familiar to people who live beside it. Communities across the Congo Basin have developed detailed knowledge of animals, plants, seasons, tracks, calls, and useful ecological relationships through many generations. The forest has never been biologically blank. Its inhabitants have been reading its living patterns for far longer than modern science has been writing them down. Their knowledge often begins with direct experience, passed through observation, language, memory, and practice. A creature can therefore arrive in a museum drawer as a new species while remaining an old acquaintance in the place where it lives. Scientific discovery and local knowledge are two different records of the same forest, written at different speeds and for different purposes. For thousands of generations, knowledge of the Congo forest has traveled without paper. It has moved through names, stories, tracks, calls, seasons, and the practical memory of people whose lives are woven into the landscape. The Mbuti and Baka peoples have deep histories in the Congo Basin, with genetic studies suggesting ancestral populations have been connected to the region for many tens of thousands of years. Their relationship with the forest is therefore measured on a different timescale from modern biological exploration. Physical life in dense forest can also favor a compact human form. Among some forest-dwelling populations, Average adult stature is relatively short, a pattern associated with several possible influences, including energy demands, mobility, heat, and long-term adaptation. For an adult male height of about 1.47 meters, which is about 4.8 feet, the body occupies less space while moving through tangled vegetation. Such traits are shaped by many interacting forces, and no single explanation can describe an entire people. The same depth of familiarity appears in the animals themselves. When the lesula was first encountered by outside researchers, the monkey was already known in the village where it was being kept. It had a local identity and a place within human knowledge. Its scientific description arrived years later. The difference was a boundary between communities, languages, and institutions, rather than a boundary between existence and discovery. The okapi carries an even older version of this pattern. Local Lescaro knowledge included the animal under a name often rendered as Oapi. European explorers received descriptions of a striped forest animal during the 19th century, and some accounts were treated with skepticism because the creature had no place in the scientific catalogues of the time. When physical evidence eventually reached European zoologists, those descriptions became part of a formal record. The animal had been there throughout the entire interval. Such moments reveal a practical lesson about exploration. A field team entering unfamiliar country does not arrive at an empty page. It arrives in a place already observed by people who know which streams hold particular fish, which calls belong to particular animals, which tracks appear after rain, and which plants change with the seasons. Local knowledge can guide researchers towards species, habitats, and behaviors that would otherwise require years of searching. This knowledge also survives through oral traditions, where observations may be carried across generations without becoming scientific papers. Some accounts remain difficult to verify. Others eventually lead to discoveries. The distinction matters because a story without a specimen cannot establish a species in zoological science, while a specimen without the knowledge surrounding it can leave researchers unaware of where to look. Across the Congo Basin, the forest has therefore been documented in two overlapping traditions. One records species through collections, measurements, genetics, and published scientific names. The other records them through memory, language, experience, and daily contact. Both describe a living world larger than any single survey can contain. And somewhere within that immense network of rivers, swamps, channels, and forest streams, there are still accounts of an animal known through local tradition, yet absent from formal zoological science. The story persists because the river keeps its own boundaries, and because knowledge can exist for generations before an expedition arrives to recognize it. For generations, stories from the interior of the Congo Basin have described an animal associated with deep water, swamps, and remote forest channels. The name Mokele Mbembe appears in accounts collected from different communities, often returning to a similar form, a large creature with a long neck and a body suited to water. Some accounts portray it as dangerous when approached. Others place it among isolated pools and river systems far from settled areas. The resemblance to a sauropod dinosaur gave the story a particular place in Western popular culture. During the 20th century, expeditions entered parts of the Congo, hoping remote swamps might shelter an animal surviving from the age of dinosaurs. Later journeys followed the same idea. No expedition produced a verified specimen, photograph, carcass, or other evidence establishing Mokele Mbembe as a surviving, non-avian dinosaur. The biological difficulty is considerable. Non-avian dinosaurs disappeared about 66 million years ago, and the intervening span contains enormous changes in climate, ecosystems, continents, and animal communities. A large dinosaur lineage surviving into the present without leaving a convincing fossil record would require an extraordinary explanation. Science has no basis for treating a living sauropod as an established possibility. The story becomes more interesting when the expeditions themselves are considered. Researchers who entered remote parts of the basin in search of an unknown giant sometimes encountered genuine biological discoveries instead. Surveys have documented unfamiliar fish, amphibians, insects, plants, and other organisms. A journey motivated by a legend could therefore return with something entirely real, simply because the landscape contained species that had never been formally described. That pattern fits the wider history of the Congo. The forest has repeatedly produced animals outside scientific catalogs, including species recognized only after genetic testing, anatomical comparison, or prolonged field observation. Some had already been familiar to local communities. Their scientific discovery changed a record that had been incomplete, while leaving the forest itself unchanged. Mokele Mbembe occupies a different category. Its reported characteristics are difficult to reconcile with established zoology, yet the persistence of the story deserves careful distinction from proof. Accounts gathered across different communities may preserve observations of real animals, combine several species, reflect cultural traditions, or describe something science has not yet identified. Without physical evidence, the identity of the reported creature cannot be determined. That uncertainty leaves room for a grounded possibility. Remote swamp forests can contain animals that are rarely encountered, especially when their populations are small, their ranges fragmented, or their habitats difficult to reach. A large unknown mammal or reptile would still be extraordinary, but it would belong to biology rather than the world of surviving dinosaurs. The deeper significance lies in what the searches repeatedly encountered. Each expedition crossed into places where scientific knowledge thinned out, and each journey had the potential to reveal organisms already there. The Congo did not need a prehistoric survivor to demonstrate that its biological record was incomplete. The species emerging from its rivers and forests had already established that. Legends endure when a landscape remains large enough to leave portions of itself beyond observation. The Congo has provided that space for generations, while holding forests, rivers, peatlands, and living communities whose importance extends beyond their borders. Its mysteries remind us how much of the living world can remain outside a catalog, even while carrying a burden that belongs to the entire planet. There is a kind of work happening across the Congo Basin that has no visible machinery. Trees grow, leaves fall, roots spread, and living organisms transform sunlight into stored matter. Together, these processes make the Congo one of the last great tropical forests, removing enormous quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year. Among the three largest tropical rainforest systems on Earth, the Congo remains the strongest intact net carbon sink. Recent estimates suggest that its forests absorb roughly 600 million metric tons more carbon dioxide each year than they release. That amount is comparable to about 1/3 of annual transportation emissions from the United States. The process is built from countless ordinary acts repeated across millions of trees. A forest elephant may carry seeds far from the tree that produced them, passing them through its digestive system before leaving them in fertile ground. Great apes perform similar ecological work as they travel between feeding areas, spreading seeds that might otherwise fall close to their parent trees. Some of those trees grow large and dense, storing carbon in trunks, roots, branches, and soil for decades or centuries. Below the leaf litter, another system operates through fungi, roots, bacteria, and decomposing organic matter. Fungal threads connect with plant roots and help exchange minerals, water, and carbon compounds. Nutrients released from fallen leaves and dead wood return to living vegetation, allowing growth to continue through successive seasons. The forest is a connected biological economy in which matter continually changes form. That complexity has accumulated across immense stretches of geological time. The tropical forests of Central Africa have deep evolutionary roots, shaped by changing climates, rivers, soils, and plant communities. Their present structure reflects countless generations of adaptation and ecological interaction. A mature rainforest cannot be recreated by planting trees alone because the relationships among plants, animals, fungi, microbes, soil, and water develop together. The contrast with other tropical forests has become increasingly important. The Amazon remains larger and receives far greater global attention, yet deforestation and climate-driven drought have weakened its capacity to absorb carbon in some regions. Parts of the Amazon have shifted toward periods when they release more carbon than they take in. The Congo still retains extensive areas where intact forest continues performing the opposite function. That makes preservation more than a matter of protecting scenery or individual species. Keeping the canopy standing also preserves the biological processes that maintain carbon storage, rainfall recycling, soil fertility, and habitat. Removing the trees interrupts several systems at once, and the damage can extend beyond the cleared ground. Far below many of those trees lies another store of carbon held in tropical peatlands. Across the Congo Basin, these waterlogged landscapes contain an estimated 30 billion tons of carbon. Saturated conditions slow decomposition and keep organic material from returning rapidly to the atmosphere. The forest above and the peat below form connected layers of the same living system, with each depending on conditions that took immense spans of time to develop. The importance of that relationship becomes clearer against human time. A road, plantation, drainage channel, or prolonged drought can alter conditions within years, while the ecological architecture being disturbed may have taken millions of years to form. Recovery can begin after protection, yet rebuilding the original network of species and processes belongs to a much longer rhythm. The Congo Basin contains a store of carbon whose protection depends on something as ordinary as water remaining where it belongs. In the Cuvette Centrale peatlands, only about 8% of the carbon is currently within nationally protected areas. The remaining 92% has no comparable legal protection, leaving an enormous underground store exposed to changes that can begin with a narrow drainage channel. Peat forms where plant material accumulates faster than it can fully decompose. Waterlogged ground limits the oxygen available to decomposing organisms, allowing layers of organic matter to build across thousands of years. Once that water is removed, the chemistry changes. Air reaches material that had been preserved in saturated soil, and decomposition accelerates. Carbon that entered the peat over many generations can begin returning to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. The transformation can be difficult to see at first. A drained peatland may still carry trees, grasses, paths, and other signs of a functioning landscape. Yet the water table has shifted, and the buried material has entered a different physical and chemical environment. Dry peat can also become vulnerable to fire, allowing combustion to release carbon much faster than ordinary decomposition. What accumulated over millennia can therefore be disturbed within a human lifetime. Indonesia provides a sobering comparison. Extensive tropical peatlands there were drained for agriculture, including areas converted for palm oil production. As water levels fell, stored organic matter became exposed to oxygen and fire. Landscapes that had accumulated carbon for thousands of years could become sources of greenhouse gases. Restoring the original hydrology is possible in some places, yet re-wetting damaged peat does not instantly recreate the ecological conditions that existed before drainage. The Congo peatlands face a different history and a different landscape, though the underlying vulnerability is shared. Roads can provide access for logging, settlement, agriculture, and plantation development. A road does more than connect two points. It changes what can reach a previously difficult landscape, and it can make further clearing economically practical. In peat country, that access may also bring the drainage infrastructure that changes the ground itself. Scientists are still refining maps, measuring peat depth, studying carbon stocks, and identifying how water moves through this immense wetland. Every new measurement improves the picture of a system whose importance extends far beyond its boundaries and deep into the global climate system. The challenge is that research and protection unfold on different clocks. Field studies require time, while infrastructure can advance much faster. A peatland created over roughly 10,000 years cannot be replaced within the span of a few generations. Once drainage lowers the water table, the accumulated material begins responding to the new conditions immediately, even if the visible forest remains for years. The earliest changes may be subtle, yet their direction can become difficult to reverse. Channels widen, water drains away, and the living forest above begins to occupy ground whose ecological balance has already shifted. The vulnerability, therefore, rests in a simple physical relationship. Keep the peat saturated, and decomposition remains constrained. Drain it, and a long stored history of plant carbon becomes exposed to the atmosphere. The roads entering the interior are therefore more than lines through forest. Where they reach peatlands, they can become pathways between an intact carbon store and a much faster cycle of release. A road changes a forest long before the pavement itself reaches every clearing. Across tropical regions where new roads have opened previously difficult interiors, measurable habitat loss has often followed within years. In the Amazon, Borneo, and parts of West Africa, road corridors became pathways for settlement, logging, hunting, and agriculture, allowing cleared ground to spread outward from the original route. The sequence can begin with something small. A vehicle enters. Hunters gain access to animals that were once costly to reach, and bushmeat can be carried toward markets with greater ease. Families seeking farmland follow the same corridor, clearing plots beside the road. Traders arrive with supplies, buyers arrive with money, and larger agricultural interests can eventually acquire land farther from the pavement. Each step has its own practical logic. Together, the steps transform the surrounding forest with surprising speed. For wildlife, the change is measured differently. A road can divide feeding grounds, alter movement patterns, increase encounters with people, and expose animals to hunting pressure. The Bili apes illustrate how this shift can follow scientific discovery closely. Their population became the focus of renewed research after the Civil War ended in 2003, while the same expanding access that allowed researchers to reach remote areas also made those areas easier for hunters to enter. The Likweli faces a related problem on a smaller geographic scale. Its known range covers roughly 1,700 square miles. That limited distribution means that disturbance in a relatively small portion of its habitat can affect a meaningful share of the population. A newly recognized species may therefore enter scientific records at almost the same moment that roads, hunting, and forest conversion begin changing the landscape around it. This creates an unusual overlap between discovery and vulnerability. For generations, isolation can preserve a population from pressures common elsewhere. Then access improves, surveys begin, specimens are collected, and a species receives a scientific name. The same opening can bring people, equipment, markets, and permanent infrastructure into places that had previously remained difficult to reach. The Congo Basin has benefited from this physical barrier for a very long time. Rivers, swamps, dense vegetation, and immense distances have limited movement across its interior. Such obstacles have helped preserve habitats where animals continued their lives without becoming familiar to outside science. Geography itself became a form of protection, even though no boundary had been drawn for that purpose. Road construction changes the equation. Once a route becomes reliable, movement no longer depends entirely on rivers, seasonal paths, or long journeys on foot. A corridor can support repeated travel, extraction, settlement, and eventually networks of smaller roads branching into surrounding forest. The original line becomes part of a larger pattern. For the animals living there, none of this represents a decision to emerge from concealment. They have been following food, finding mates, raising young, and moving through territories shaped by ecological conditions for generations. Their unfamiliarity to science reflects the limits of access and observation. A species can remain unknown to researchers while being completely present within its own world. That distinction matters. As the Congo becomes more connected, the forest is not revealing creatures that have only just appeared. It is exposing creatures that have been here all along, while the same roads making them easier to study can also make them easier to reach. The word hidden has followed the creatures of the Congo for years, appearing whenever science encounters an animal beyond familiar roads and field stations. The shoebill, the lungfish, the Mormyrid fishes, the Bili chimpanzees, and the Likweli monkey have each been described in that language, yet the word belongs more to the observer than to the animal. A creature can remain unknown to science while remaining ordinary within its own world. Consider the shoebill, whose remarkable stillness is part of a hunting strategy shaped by shallow waters where fish can be difficult to pursue. Remaining motionless reduces disturbance, allowing the bird to wait until prey enters striking range. Its behavior makes sense within its habitat. It requires no explanation involving human observers. The bird is responding to fish, water, vegetation, heat, and the rhythms of its own body. The green mamba offers another example. Its coloration blends with the foliage of the canopy, helping it approach prey and remain inconspicuous among branches and leaves. That adaptation belongs to a much older ecological relationship. Birds existed before modern people entered these forests, and snakes were already responding to the opportunities created by life in the trees. The camouflage was never designed around a scientist. The lungfish carries an even older story. Its ability to survive dry periods by entering estivation developed in environments shaped by seasonal water loss hundreds of millions of years ago. The animal seals itself into a protective chamber and reduces its metabolism to an extraordinary degree. Such a strategy belongs to a lineage adapting to drought, not to a species anticipating future attempts at collection or observation. These examples change the meaning of discovery. Human beings arrived late to an ecological story already filled with relationships, behaviors, and adaptations. We named species, mapped their ranges, described their anatomy, and placed specimens into collections. Each act expanded scientific knowledge, yet the animals had already been living without requiring recognition. The Congo adds another layer because access has been so uneven. Rivers can lead deep into the basin, while swamps, dense vegetation, distance, and seasonal conditions can make other areas difficult to reach. A species may therefore remain absent from scientific records for generations, while local people recognize it, hunt it, avoid it, trade it, or speak of it as part of everyday life. Scientific absence and biological absence are entirely different things. Roads change that distinction. Once an interior becomes reachable by vehicles, equipment, markets, and repeated travel, the forest is exposed to pressures that animals did not evolve alongside. Hunting can intensify, habitat can be cleared, populations can become isolated. The same access that allows a researcher to document a species can allow a hunter to reach it, or a developer to reach its habitat. There is something almost tender in realizing how little these creatures were concerned with being found. Their senses, colors, behaviors, and survival strategies were shaped by older necessities. They were living according to rules written long before our arrival. The forest was never keeping them from us. We were simply late to the place where they had always been. Now, the distance that once protected them is shrinking, and the animals face a new pressure with no inherited defense against it. They were not hiding from us. We have become the thing they could never have evolved to anticipate. A forest this old does not unravel one thread at a time. Its living relationships overlap, reinforce one another, and pass effects from one habitat into another. When a species that shapes its surroundings disappears, the change can travel far beyond the place where that animal lived. A wetland can shrink, a river can change. A food web can lose a connection that had endured for generations. Along swamp margins, the shoebill depends on conditions created upstream. Forest cover helps regulate how rain enters the ground and how water moves through soils, streams, and floodplains. When trees are removed, runoff can become faster and sediment can move differently through the watershed. Wetlands may then change in ways that alter shallow feeding grounds where shoebills search for fish. The bird can decline without a hunter ever entering its territory. The same principle reaches into the river itself. Mormyrid fishes read their surroundings through electric signals, and those signals depend partly on water conductivity. Conductivity changes with dissolved minerals and other substances carried through the river. Forest clearing can alter runoff, while agriculture can introduce compounds that change water chemistry. A sensory system, refined through countless generations, may therefore encounter water whose electrical properties have shifted around it. For the African lungfish, time has another meaning. Estivation allows the fish to endure severe seasonal drying by entering a state of greatly reduced metabolism inside a protective chamber. Experiments have shown survival through several years of dormancy, with 7 years often cited as the longest demonstrated period under controlled conditions. Longer or more frequent droughts place that adaptation under a different pressure. A survival strategy built around seasonal hardship has limits when the season itself begins to change. These examples reveal why specialists can be vulnerable even when they appear extraordinarily well adapted. The shoebill is shaped for particular wetlands. Mormyrids depend on a particular chemical and electrical environment. The lungfish carries a physiological response suited to a recurring pattern of drought and recovery. Their strengths come from precision. Each species fits a narrow set of conditions with an efficiency that generalist animals may never need to achieve. That precision has accumulated through immense spans of evolutionary time. Generations inherited small variations, environments filtered them, and successful traits remained in populations. Across millions of years, those changes produced bodies and behaviors matched to particular rivers, forests, seasons, prey, and soils. The result is a collection of organisms whose unusual qualities are inseparable from the places that shape them. When those places change, extinction can begin before the final individual disappears. A wetland may become unsuitable first. Water chemistry may drift beyond a fish's familiar range. Drought may exceed the period an animal can withstand. The species remains present for a while, yet the ecological foundation supporting it has already begun to thin. What is at stake extends beyond a catalog of rare animals. Each species carries a record of evolutionary experimentation that cannot be recreated once lost. The Congo has preserved those experiments across roughly 70 million years of changing life and climate. Science has only recently begun to read some of them, while others remain known through fragments, observations, and names. When one of these strange creatures disappears, a living experiment ends with it. The loss is measured in individuals, habitats, and populations, but also in the disappearance of a path evolution once took and can never take again. Some animals carry history in ways that cannot be seen from the outside. The shoebill carries one of the clearest examples. It is the only living member of its family, Balaenosippidae. That leaves no surviving sister species beside it. Its lineage has passed through millions of years of environmental change, with no living branch remaining alongside it. When the last shoebill disappears, an entire evolutionary line disappears with it, leaving no related species that can continue that particular history. The African lungfish carries a much older inheritance. Its genome preserves an enormous record of evolutionary change stretching back roughly 400 million years. Within its cells are traces of adaptations shaped across the Devonian, the Carboniferous, the Permian, the Triassic, and the many environmental crises that followed. The animal alive in the Congo today belongs to that uninterrupted biological story. It may be moving through shallow water, rising for air, or resting inside a hardened chamber of mud during a dry season. Each state belongs to the same lineage that endured when entire groups of other organisms vanished. Mormyrid fishes carry another kind of inheritance, one written through electricity. Their electric sense evolved within the African river system and later diversified into more than 200 species. Each species occupies its own ecological setting, yet they share the same fundamental sensory innovation. Their signals depend upon the physical properties of the water around them. If the chemistry of the Congo River changes across large parts of the basin, many branches of this radiation could encounter the same environmental pressure at once. A single alteration could therefore reach across an entire evolutionary experiment. The Bili chimpanzees carry something less tangible. Their isolation has allowed generations to develop distinctive patterns of behavior, ecology, and social life. Researchers have only begun to understand what makes this population different. Isolation is an ongoing process, and every generation can add another small change to the accumulated character of a population. If the forest surrounding them is opened extensively and their numbers fall, the future of that process changes with it. Whatever further differences might have emerged can never be observed. Every generation leaves another small mark upon a history with no duplicate. This is why biological rarity carries a meaning deeper than a number on a conservation list. A species can represent a lineage, a sensory invention, a survival strategy, or a behavioral path that exists nowhere else. Its body is the visible surface of a much larger record. The record includes climates endured, predators escaped, diseases resisted, rivers followed, droughts survived, and relationships formed with countless other organisms. Museum specimens can preserve bones, skins, tissues, and genetic material. Scientific descriptions can preserve measurements, photographs, recordings, and observations. None can restore a living lineage once its final population disappears. A preserved specimen tells us what an organism was. A living population continues to reveal what that organism can still become. The Congo, therefore, holds more than unusual animals. It holds biological histories that remain active in the present. The shoebill is still carrying its solitary lineage. The lungfish is still carrying deep evolutionary time. The Mormyrids are still extending one electrical innovation into new forms. The Bili chimpanzees are still adding generations to an unfinished experiment. Their records are older than anything human civilization has produced, and they are still being written. For 3 centuries, naturalists have been drawing the living world into a catalog, giving names to organisms, comparing specimens, and building a shared record of Earth's biodiversity. The work has produced descriptions of millions of species, yet the catalog remains incomplete. Every generation of fieldwork changes the outline again, adding organisms that were present all along but had never entered the formal record in any scientific account at all. Estimates of total species diversity still leave perhaps 1 to 2 million species awaiting formal description, with tropical forests containing a large share of what remains unrecorded. The Congo makes that incompleteness visible in ways that are difficult to dismiss. The Likweli monkey lived in the Lomami forest for roughly 4 million years before science formally recognized it. The Cuvette Centrale peatland accumulated for about 10,000 years before researchers mapped its immense stores of organic carbon. The Central African slender-snouted crocodile followed its evolutionary path through the Congo River long before genetic comparisons established that it represented a distinct species. Each case carries the same small correction to an old habit of thinking. A blank space in a scientific database can look like an empty space in nature. The two are completely different. A species does not begin existing when a paper gives it a name. A population does not become real when a specimen enters a collection. Scientific recognition records a discovery made by people. It does not create the organism being discovered. That distinction matters most in places where access has always been limited. Deep within the Cuvette Centrale are wetlands that have never received the kind of continuous biological survey familiar from more accessible landscapes. A fish can spend its entire life in a channel that no researcher has sampled. An insect can complete thousands of generations within one stretch of vegetation without appearing in a scientific collection. A small mammal can occupy a narrow range and remain absent from formal records simply because nobody has reached the right place at the right season. Somewhere in that interior, there are almost certainly organisms without scientific names. They are not waiting for discovery. Their lives are already complete in every biological sense. They feed, compete, reproduce, migrate, age, and die according to relationships that have developed around them for generations. Their absence from a catalog changes nothing about their place within the forest itself. The deeper the survey moves into difficult terrain, the more the map begins to acquire life. New names appear beside old ones. A species thought to belong to one lineage becomes something distinct. A familiar river reveals another fish. A forest path becomes the edge of a range that had never been measured. There is no final page waiting at the end of this process. The Congo remains a living system whose biological boundaries are still being traced. Its deepest regions have preserved distance as a form of protection, leaving many species beyond regular observation. That distance has made them difficult to document, yet it has also allowed their lives to continue beyond the reach of formal science. The map is unfinished because the forest is still larger than our knowledge of it. The deepest interior is not a place where life has gone to hide. It is simply where the forest has always been. There is a useful change in perspective when the Congo is viewed from the lives unfolding inside it. Human observation occupies only a thin interval, while the forest itself operates across spans of time that make observation seem brief. For most of its existence, a creature here has lived without a name, without a specimen label, and without appearing in any scientific record. That condition is ordinary. Being documented is the unusual event. Consider the Likweli monkey. Its lineage persisted in the Lomami forest for millions of years before scientists formally described it. The period available to modern science is tiny beside that history. Even if the species were observed continuously from the moment of its description, the record would still represent only a fraction of its existence. The forest carried on through generations of animals that never encountered a researcher, never entered a collection, and never became part of a published account. The shoebill offers another measure of the distance between nature and human attention. Images of birds resembling it appear in Egyptian art from roughly 3,000 years ago, yet its lineage reaches much farther into the past. Its broad bill, heavy body, and patient hunting behavior developed within wetland environments long before written language gave people a way to record what they saw. Recognition arrived after the creature had already completed an immense history of its own. The African lungfish reaches even deeper into that history. Its lineage extends back into the Devonian period, hundreds of millions of years ago, when different forms of vertebrate life were spreading through ancient waters. Its ability to survive drying conditions by entering a dormant state belongs to an evolutionary story shaped by environments that existed long before forests resembled those of the Congo today. The adaptation was useful for surviving drought. Human observation had no part in its origin. A different kind of inheritance belongs to the Mormyrid fishes. Their electric sense allows them to detect disturbances in the surrounding water and orient themselves within their river habitats. This sensory system evolved through a long history of adaptation in African freshwater environments, giving these fishes a way of perceiving their surroundings that humans cannot naturally experience. Their rivers carried those signals for ages before any primate had appeared. Seen across geological time, the span of scientific attention becomes almost vanishingly small. A species may be watched for a century, studied for several decades, or represented by only a handful of specimens, while its lineage stretches across millions of years. The imbalance matters because the absence of observation can easily be mistaken for absence itself. A riverbank without a survey marker can still hold breeding grounds, feeding territories, and seasonal movements repeated for generations. A patch of swamp can contain relationships among plants, insects, fish, birds, and mammals that remain outside every record until someone happens to enter it. The blank space belongs to the map, not to the living world. Across the Congo, countless lives continue outside the boundary of formal knowledge. They are feeding, breeding, competing, dispersing, and dying according to relationships older than any human record. Their existence requires no witness. Their histories do not pause when a survey ends, and they do not begin when a scientist arrives. In a forest shaped through immense stretches of geological time, human visibility is the brief condition. The lives beyond it are the enduring one. At the edge of the Cuvette Centrale, a shoebill may stand, with its bill angled toward the water, waiting for the instant when a fish moves within reach. Its posture belongs to a hunting strategy shaped by wetland life, repeated across generations long before anyone thought to record it. The bird responds to water, movement, hunger, breeding, and changing conditions around it. Somewhere else in the Congo Basin, an African lungfish may be breathing atmospheric air through its lungs, as lungfishes have done through an evolutionary history stretching back hundreds of millions of years. When a seasonal pool dries, the animal can retreat into damp soil and form a protective cocoon around its body. Its metabolism falls dramatically, allowing it to endure conditions that would overwhelm most aquatic animals. Rain eventually restores the water, and the lungfish emerges into a habitat that may look transformed, while the basic rhythm of its survival remains familiar. In the rivers, Mormyrid fishes inhabit a sensory world built from electricity. Specialized organs produce weak electrical signals, while receptors distributed across the body detect disturbances in the surrounding field. From those changes, the fish can locate objects, navigate through murky water, and communicate with members of its own species. The river carries information that human senses cannot directly perceive. A fish moving through darkness is responding to a landscape made partly of signals, conductivity, and living bodies. Far away, in the Bili forest, chimpanzees continue their social lives shaped by relationships, feeding patterns, movement, and learned behavior. Their isolation has given researchers unusual opportunities to study characteristics that differ from better-known chimpanzee populations. The animals themselves are simply feeding, traveling, resting, and raising young within the conditions their forest provides. High in the vegetation, insects follow another rhythm. The Goliath beetle, among the largest beetles on Earth, moves through branches and leaf litter with a body adapted to vegetation, decay, and competition. Sunlight reaches different layers of the forest in different amounts, creating a vertical arrangement of habitats. At the ground, little light arrives compared with the canopy, while leaves above intercept much of the incoming radiation. Each layer supports its own community, and each community alters the conditions around it. This is what makes the Congo difficult to understand from a single human viewpoint. The forest is not one process unfolding at one speed. It is millions of overlapping processes, each following its own biological clock. A fish senses an electrical disturbance in an instant. A lungfish may remain dormant through a prolonged dry season. A chimpanzee learns behavior across years. A lineage changes through countless generations. None of these lives depends upon being witnessed. Scientific observation adds knowledge to the human record, while the living system continues regardless of whether anyone is present to describe it. The forest has no need to announce what is occurring inside it. Its inhabitants carry on through hunger, reproduction, migration, competition, decay, and renewal, linked by relationships that existed before human language. For an animal in the Cuvette Centrale, tonight is another moment in a history already immensely long. Water moves through roots and channels. Fish read electrical signals. Birds wait for movement. Mammals travel between feeding places. Somewhere beyond the reach of a survey team, another organism is living without a scientific name, following a life that began long before any map could include it.